From the 1st to the 4th century AD, Christians endured sporadic persecution across the Roman Empire, clashing with the entrenched pagan practices of the time. As Christianity spread, it colluded with the imperial cult of ancient Rome and sparked ideological conflicts. Rejecting rituals like offering sacrifices to deified emperors, Christians faced accusations of treason and introducing a foreign cult. Hello everyone, welcome to ASMR Historian. If you're new here, it's good to see you, and if you're coming back, welcome back again for another video. If you'd like to support the channel, I've opened up Patreon memberships, where all videos are ad-free and 1080p quality. Also, helping me out in the algorithm with a like, comment, and subscribe does more than you could imagine. Well, without further ado, let's get on to today's video: Christian persecution in the Roman Empire. At the onset of the Roman Empire, spanning from 27 BC to 476 AD, religious practices were predominantly polytheistic and localized. Each city revered its own pantheon of gods and goddesses, initially borrowed from Greek mythology, but adapted to suit Roman culture and sensibilities. These city-centric religious frameworks, known as polis religions, were deeply intertwined with the political and civic identity of the populace. Religious expression wasn't just confined to personal belief, but rather constituted communal ritualistic practices, overseen primarily by public officials, notably the Senate. The fusion of religion with politics would become a defining characteristic of Roman life during this era. However, as the 1st century BC unfolded, support for traditional Roman polytheism began to dwindle little by little. Viewed as increasingly hollow and ineffective by contemporary writers and historians. A myriad of factors, both internal and external, contributed to this decline, including the ravages of war, the influx of foreign cultures, and the politicization of religious institutions. This gradual erosion of traditional religious fervor left a void in the spiritual lives of many Romans, paving the way for the emergence of alternative forms of spirituality. In response to this vacuum, various alternative religious movements gained traction, including the imperial cult, mystery cults, imported Eastern religions, and of course, Christianity. While the Roman Empire exhibited a degree of cultural permeability, allowing foreigners to integrate, its approach was a little bit nuanced when it came to religious tolerance. While some foreign gods were assimilated into the Roman pantheon, adherence to ancestral customs played a crucial role in determining acceptance within the Roman society. This apparent openness to foreign beliefs was, however, tempered by instances of intolerance, particularly towards practices perceived as deviating from the established norms. Suspicion and suppression were often directed towards certain religious groups. such as the followers of Dionysus and the practitioners of Bacchanalia, associated with secretive and nocturnal rituals. The state's response to perceived religious threats followed a pattern of suppression, evidenced by periodic expulsions and crackdowns on various religious groups, including Jews, devotees of the Egyptian gods, and of course Christians. The discussion surrounding the reasons behind Roman persecution of Christians gained momentum in 1890, sparking 2 decades of controversy and the emergence of 3 main theories. The first theory, predominantly held by French and Belgian scholars, posited that the existence of a general imperial decree, either attributed to Nero or Domitian, expressly prohibited the practice of Christian religion. This theory, evolving into a common law perspective, drew heavily from Tertullian's accounts, suggesting that Nero's older resolution against new religions was applied to Christians based on the principle that introducing a new superstition without state authorization was indeed a capital offense. While this theory offered an explanation for persecution in Rome, its applicability to the provinces remained elusive, prompting the need for a secondary theory. The second theory, originating with German scholars and widely recognized among English readers, proposed coercion as the primary motive behind Roman persecution. According to this perspective, Roman governors punished Christians to maintain social order, viewing the Christian faith as an alien cult that threatened traditional Roman religion and societal norms. This view portrayed persecution as a direct police action, devoid of formal trial procedures, aimed at suppressing notable dissenters and maintaining the established order. The third school of thought suggested that Christians were targeted for specific criminal offenses, including murder, incest, magic, illegal assembly, infanticide, and even treason. This theory, often combined with the coercion theory, attributed all Christian persecution to a single criminal charge, particularly treason, or perhaps illegal assembly, stemming from their refusal to worship the divinity of the Roman emperor. Well, despite the existence of malicious rumors, this theory lacked substantial verification compared to the other two, according to later scholarship. In this ideological struggle, ordinary Christians lived under constant threat of denunciation and potential capital charges. One modern scholar, Joseph Bryant, highlights the difficulty Christians faced in hiding their faith or conforming to Roman norms, as renunciation of the world was integral to their entire belief system. It was either one or the other. Their exacting moral standards, which included avoiding associations with those deemed under the influence of the evil one, made daily life as a Christian quite a test of courage. Participation in civic festivals, games, and performances, which often honored pagan deities, posed significant risks for Christians. Certain occupations and activities, such as military service, idol manufacturing, and cultural pursuits that affirmed polytheistic beliefs, were simply deemed incompatible with Christian principles. Even personal adornment and grooming practices were scrutinized by Christian moralists and ecclesiastical officials. In Rome, loyalty to the state was demonstrated through participation in the rites of state religion, always had been, which Christians did not and could not adhere to, marking them as members of an illicit and subversive religion. It's no wonder a few eyebrows were raised. The privatization of religion further fueled suspicion and persecution, as Christians moved their religious activities away from public spaces, meeting clandestinely in homes and shops. Nighttime gatherings and rumors of outrageous crimes, including cannibalism, by the way, further fueled distrust among the pagan population accustomed to religion as a pretty public affair. People even began spreading rumors that there were Christian PDF files. Right. Early Christian communities stood out for their remarkable inclusivity across social strata, surpassing even the Roman voluntary associations in this regard. The groups formed by Paul the Apostle exhibited significant heterogeneity, with women playing a notable greater role compared to contemporary Jewish or pagan communities. Emphasizing love for others, including enemies, Christians of all backgrounds refer to each other as brother and sister. This openness stemmed from the early Christian belief in spreading their message to both Jews and Gentiles, aiming to convert them to a new way of life in line with their gospel teachings. However, opponents of Christianity viewed this inclusivity as a disruptive threat to traditional social order. After all, the whole love for enemies thing, well, how's that going to go when you're in a war? After all, we're Romans, and everybody else is not Roman. How can we love that? Now, we can't make a video about Rome without talking about Edward Gibbon, right? The great, in retrospect, historian. Read his work, Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. I know it's about 10,000 pages long, but it's the most concise work that we have. Edward Gibbon observed that Christian converts' tendency to renounce their familial and national ties, coupled with their predictions of impending disasters, aroused apprehension among their pagan neighbors. By embracing Christianity, converts were seen as breaking the sacred customs, disregarding their country's religious traditions, and rejecting their ancestral beliefs. All of these accusations were, of course, considered to be unforgivable offenses. Cardinal sin, if you'll excuse the wording. Moreover, many pagans believed that neglecting to honor the established pagan gods would lead to calamities, natural disasters, defeats in wars, that sort of thing. Tertullian, a Christian apologist, lamented the widespread perception that Christians were responsible for every disaster inflicted by the gods. Natural disasters such as floods or droughts were often attributed to the presence of Christians, leading to calls for their persecution, including them being thrown to lions and other wild animals in spectacles for everybody to watch. This perception underscored the deep-seated animosity towards Christianity among a growing segment of Roman society, fueled by not only fears of the Senate, but divine retribution for abandoning traditional pagan practices. Think about it. You've got the god of war, the god of the agriculture, the god of everything, don't you? Well, if a segment of the population started ignoring them and even outright denying them, well, that would of course make the god angry, wouldn't it? And what are you going to do with this group of people in your society that are angering your gods? Well, you can't just let them do it, can't you? That would leave you open to all sorts of trouble. Now, Roman religion played a pivotal role in defining what it meant to be a Roman. Refusal by Christians to participate in the rituals honoring the Roman gods was perceived as a direct challenge to the cultural and political essence of Rome itself. Eusebius, as cited in later modern historical works, highlights the conviction among pagans that their actions were righteous, contrasting them with the perceived impiety of Christians. The polytheistic worldview of the Romans made it difficult for them to comprehend the refusal to worship state gods, even if it were only in a symbolic manner. Christians were constantly compelled to defend their beliefs. Despite their efforts to rationalize their stance and appeal to philosophy, they found themselves rather unable to reconcile participation in Roman religious practices with their allegiance to their own faith. This tension led to widespread prejudice against Christians, to the extent that simply confessing to being Christian was sufficient grounds for execution. Now, scholarly opinions, of course, are going to vary regarding the legal foundation for the persecution of Christians in the early centuries AD. Some historians tend to emphasize the ambiguity surrounding the legal justifications for these actions. Some even identify Trajan's era as the earliest instance of formal legal measures against Christians, suggesting a rather significant shift in their treatment. You must remember that in the very, very early days of Christianity, it was more of a localized cult, like any religion sort of starts off to be. Very few people believed in it. But then, of course, when the apostles went over to different parts of the world and began to proselytize, they began to gain more followers. Well, on the question of precedence, some scholars attribute the killing of Christians to Nero, despite the absence of explicit Roman laws against them. Others argue that while no specific law targeted Christians before Nero, there was a precedent for suppressing foreign superstitions in general, rooted in the belief that ancestral gods were the cornerstone of Roman law. So it's not just that they were targeting Christians, especially, but they were really just targeting anybody who was a threat to the status quo. Like any other religion or civilization of the time, they would be generally not too accepting towards people coming in with new ideas that threatens the established norms. Of course, it's also been suggested that the mass executions under Emperor Nero kind of established a precedent, leading to Christians being subject to capital punishment simply for their affiliation. Basically, they became the punching bag, the people to blame for all of the problems, and it was fun to hate on them for a lot of Romans, if we're going to use the most simplistic terms. Furthermore, Christians were typically prosecuted under a special law introduced during Nero's reign, supported by Tertullian and Nero's resolution against any new religions. Of course, the bigger the empire gets, you must remember it borders other regions. And other regions have their own customs, their own cultures, and of course, their own religions. Well, the Romans didn't want any of that. They were simply there for the tax revenue and whatever other resources they could get from these new regions. But those trade routes always have fostered great conversations between peoples. Now, Trajan's correspondence with Pliny indicates that Christians were being executed for their faith long before AD 110, although at this time there was no empire-wide Roman law that criminalized Christianity especially. So it's also underscored that the discretionary powers of governors in prosecuting Christians, well, they were simply that, discretionary. Anybody could look at a certain group of people causing trouble within their region and take whatever action they thought was appropriate. In the Roman legal system, bringing a case against a Christian typically required only a prosecutor, a charge of Christianity, and a governor who was willing to proceed with the case. Due to the system's focus on property rights, criminal and public law had quite a few gaps, leading to the use of special investigations known as cognition extra ordinem. Provincial governors had the authority to conduct trials in this manner, allowing for a broad range of outcomes, mainly based on their personal opinions and instinct. Now, during cognition extra ordinem, an accuser called a delator presented the case before the governor, who acted as both the judge and the jury. The outcome of the trial often depended on the governor's discretion, with very little legal guidance available. Now, before Decius's anti-Christian policies, there wasn't any wide-ranging edict to tell people what to do with this group, and Trajan's response to Pliny basically served as a precedent, indicating that the mere identification as a Christian, that was enough grounds for punishment. The trials of the Christians varied widely, with some following Pliny's formula of offering a chance to recant and prove loyalty to the Roman gods and the emperor. Some governors, particularly in Africa, helped accused Christians secure acquittals or refuse to bring them to trial. Overall, governors were more interested in making apostates rather than martyrs. Of course, at least you get the chance to recant your ways. We can see this a lot in our modern religious framework, of course. If somebody is having a crisis of faith and is going to leave the Christian church, well, usually an intervention is held where people try and convince them to do otherwise. Of course, these days in the Christian faith, they don't get executed. That's one good thing, I suppose. During the Great Persecution, governors received direct edicts from the emperor to destroy Christian churches and texts. They forbid Christian worship and arrested the Christian clergy. Despite these orders, the enforcements, of course, varied, with some governors claiming to shed no Christian blood, and others simply turning a blind eye to evasions of the edict. When governors were appointed to provinces, their foremost task was to maintain order and stability. To achieve this, they prioritized keeping the populace content. Keep everybody happy, no rebellions, no problems. Throw in a few gladiatorial matches and everybody's quite satiated. Therefore, when unrest against Christians emerged, governors sought to appease it to prevent riots or violence. In the Roman Empire, political leaders also served as public cult leaders, and Roman religion emphasized public ceremonies and sacrifices rather than individual, personal beliefs. Honoring tradition, known as pietas, was crucial for social and political well-being. Consequently, the Romans protected the cults practiced by communities under their rule, viewing it as essential to uphold ancestral traditions. Now, in the early days, it was pretty hard to tell the Christians apart from the Jews. Many of the Romans simply couldn't tell the difference, because they saw Jesus as a Jewish prophet. So they thought, well, this is just a different kind of Jew, right? Well, wrong. The distinction between Christianity and Judaism became more pronounced over time. Christians were exempt from paying the Jewish tax after Nerva's modification in 96, and this, at least in a legal sense, solidified their separate identity from the Jews. Of course, the Christians themselves knew they were completely separate, but everybody else had to catch on to that idea over time. Now, Roman disdain for Christianity stemmed partly from the perception that was growing at this time that it was, in general, a detriment to society, for the aforementioned reasons. Once Christianity was no longer viewed as a subset of Judaism, it was simply deemed a superstition, which had massive implications for Roman society. Superstitio was seen as completely corrosive, causing individuals to lose their humanity. While the persecution of superstitious sects was not uncommon in Roman history, the level of persecution against Christians varied depending on the perceived threat that they posed. Christian beliefs and practices were viewed with suspicion by many Roman officials, given their worship of a convicted criminal. That's right. Refusal to swear by the emperor's genius, and criticism of Rome in their religious texts. You must remember that Jesus was found guilty by the Romans and executed by the Romans. So the Christians taking this person on as their main role model, that was definitely a slap in the face to the established order. And this is really where the false accusations, such as the incest libel, really began to kick off. And at every turn, these accusations were used to discredit the Christians. Not just that, but they were also used as an excuse to justify the persecution. You can't just take people out into the streets and beat them for no reason. Of course, the Christians, while they were being persecuted, had very little recourse to speak out. They couldn't really defend themselves too much. Well, the early Christian persecution began rather sporadically and locally, with the first organized persecution with government approval, beginning by Nero in AD 64, following the Great Fire of Rome, which the Christians also got blamed for. This persecution was, however, confined to the city of Rome, but over time, the persecution continued intermittently, with mob violence becoming increasingly common, possibly even fueled by rival sects within Christianity, as they were fighting amongst each other as well. In the mid-2nd century, incidents such as the persecution at Lyon in AD 177 included a massive mob assaulting and gathering up the Christians to be stoned. Additionally, there were instances of elaborate hoaxes perpetuated against Christians, as described by the satirist Lucian. Emperor Decius issued a decree in AD 250, requiring a public sacrifice as a gesture of allegiance to the emperor and the established order. While the decree was not specifically aimed at Christians, they were often targeted due to their refusal to participate. Christians then faced arrest, imprisonment, torture, and then, unfortunately, execution for refusing to comply. Some Christians fled to rural areas, while others obtained certificates called libelli by purchasing them or offering sacrifices to Roman gods, basically a get-out-of-jail-free card. The acceptance of these lapsed Christians was of course a topic of debate within the Christian community. Not a good way to make friends in the church. The persecutions reached their peak under Diocletian and Galerius at the end of the 3rd and beginning of the 4th century. However, the Edict of Serdica, issued by Emperor Galerius in AD 311, officially ended the persecution of Christianity in the Eastern Roman Empire. Western Roman Empire had to catch up a little bit. Constantine the Great subsequently legalized Christianity in AD 313 with the Edict of Milan. It wasn't until the latter part of the 4th century, under Emperor Theodosius I, that Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. So do remember that many people have the misconception that Constantine the Great was the one who did all of the heavy lifting. And yes, he did. But it was Theodosius that really made it the official religion. The debate surrounding the extent and severity of early Christian persecutions traces its origins to historians such as Gibbon and Bowersock. Gibbon's work, the 10,000-page tome Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, along with his other essays, although praised as a masterpiece, has been criticized for certain biases that may have influenced his historical method. Specifically, Gibbon's skepticism towards Christian martyr accounts led him to believe that the numbers and the brutality of persecutions were somewhat exaggerated. Subsequent scholars have expanded on Gibbon's argument, suggesting that the exaggeration was necessary to foster the cult of the martyrs and solidify a distinct Christian identity separate from Roman and Jewish identities. However, Dean and Theology Professor Graydon F. Snyder challenged this notion, arguing that the cult of martyrs did not influence early records, as it did not emerge until after Constantine. Despite Gibbon's skepticism, most modern scholars are less doubtful of the severity of persecutions. One historian of the Diocletian era emphasized that the horrors of persecution were plausible and not to be dismissed lightly. The authenticity of pre-Constantinian accounts of martyrdom remains a subject of debate, of course. These accounts, categorized into three groups, range from official records and direct testimonies to later hagiographic fantasies. Now, what about Eusebius? Well, while some question the reliability of Eusebius due to his biases and errors, many of his claims are considered dependable due to his meticulous use of original sources. For example, Eusebius's citation of Melito's Apology and Justin's Apologies corroborates imperial letters that attest to the criminalization of Christianity during Marcus Aurelius's reign. The classification of early Christian martyrs has sparked significant debate, particularly regarding the voluntariness of martyrdom and the accuracy of estimating the total number of martyrs during the Great Persecution. Now, G.E.M. Croy categorizes early Christian martyrs into three groups based on their actions leading to persecution: volunteers for martyrdom, those whose behavior attracted persecution, and those pursued by authorities without any overt act on their part. However, his broad definition of voluntary martyrdom has been criticized by other scholars, who argue that the voluntariness was not as prevalent as St. Gras suggests. Now, Bowersock proposes that voluntary martyrdom became widespread by the end of the 2nd century, prompting church authorities to distinguish between solicited martyrdom and persecution-induced martyrdom. Candida Moss challenges the notion of voluntary martyrdom as a distinct category in early Christianity, suggesting that such distinctions only emerged in later centuries. Another modern observer, Paul Middleton, supports the validity of voluntary martyrdom as a subset of early Christian martyrdom, citing examples from early Christian texts. He suggests that while voluntary martyrdom was criticized in later Christianity, volunteers were also valorized as martyrs in the earliest Christian traditions. Now, the estimation of the total number of martyrs during the Great Persecution has also been a point of contention. St. Croix's estimate relies on Eusebius's account of martyrs in Palestine, but scholars from our modern era, like Timothy Barnes, dispute the comprehensiveness of Eusebius's intent. Others suggest that additional martyr narratives not mentioned by Eusebius may also exist, complicating efforts at arriving at a precise figure. Now, Gibbon's approach to estimating the number of martyrs has also been criticized for its dependence on assumptions about population distribution and accuracy. Subsequent estimates have varied widely, with Anglican historian W.C. Frond estimating 3,000 to 3,500 martyrs, while others suggest that over 24,000 martyrs suffered under Diocletian. Well, despite attempts to quantify martyrdom, scholars caution against relying solely on numbers to understand the sufferings of early Christians, emphasizing the limitations of statistical data in capturing the full impact of persecution on the Christian community. Well, there you have it. A somewhat brief introduction to Christian persecutions under the ancient Roman regime. I will be making more videos deeper into specific persecutions under specific emperors at a later date. Probably soon. We shall see. But until then, I would like to thank my patron, the first one of the Mega Chad tier, the Stark Factory, out there doing what he does best. Thank you very much to Stark Factory for supporting the channel. If you would like to support the channel, then why don't you head over to my Patreon, where all the videos are ad-free. Imagine that. What a glorious thing to behold. Otherwise, continue to enjoy the content on YouTube. It's been a pleasure to be with you once again, and I'll see you in the next video. Good night, everyone.